Speaking of questions, Pakistan's Prime Minister is getting a lot of them, and not friendly ones either. Pakistanis are trolling and grilling Shehbaz Sharif, their Prime Minister. Why? Because of an announcement that he made on social media. Take a look at this. Sharif said Saudi Arabia had deposited money in the State Bank of Pakistan, which is their central bank. And how much money? Around $2 billion. Shehbaz Sharif said this deposit will boost Pakistan's foreign reserves. He also thanked the Saudi Crown Prince for it, Mohammed bin Salman. But look at the comments below. Don't speak on behalf of Pakistanis. We abhor this government and the situation it has put us in. Here's another comment. And I'm quoting again, this will end up in an offshore account. You will eat all this money like before. They're paying for your extraordinary lifestyle. What explains this hatred? You would think getting $2 billion is a big deal, especially for Pakistan. Their forex reserves were down to $3.9 billion in June, which is $179 million less than the month before. So why are Pakistanis hating on Shehbaz Sharif? Two reasons for that. One, he is deeply unpopular as Prime Minister. Without the army, he has no power. Just look at the same tweet we showed you. Towards the end, he's thanked the Pakistan Army Chief, General Asim Munir. Can you imagine this in any other country? The Prime Minister is thanking the Army Chief for assistance given by another country. So that's one reason why he's not liked. And the second reason is this. You don't get credit for fixing your own mess. Shehbaz Sharif is not part of the solution. He and his party have been part of the problem. And the people of Pakistan know this. Hence all the trolling. The same thing happened last month. Shehbaz Sharif was in Paris for global financial talks. It was raining heavily that day, so a local official went up to him with an umbrella. Guess what he did? He took the umbrella and walked away. The poor official was left drenched in the rain. The Prime Minister was trolled then too. He was called a national embarrassment and Pakistan's Mr. Bean. So what can he do to fix it? Well, he's had some success in the last 2 weeks. The IMF staffers have approved a bailout for Pakistan, a package worth $3 billion. The next step is approval from the IMF board, the International Monetary Fund. A meeting is scheduled for today. If all goes well, the money will soon be released. In fact, that bailout, the IMF bailout, is the reason why Saudi Arabia gave Pakistan the money it did. Riyadh had promised this deposit in April, but they were waiting for the IMF to clear the bailout. Either way, the money is in. Both these developments have improved Pakistan's economic outlook. Ratings agency Fitch has upgraded them. Their default rating was CCC minus. Now it's just CCC. They've removed the minus. Their finance minister has called it, quote unquote, another positive news. I guess there's only one direction to go from rock bottom. Now, to be clear, CCC is not much of an improvement. It still means substantial credit risk. That's what Pakistan is, substantial credit risk. So Pakistan is not out of the woods yet. Far from it. Their inflation is almost 38%. It is now the highest in Asia, even more than Sri Lanka. Their fiscal deficit is also widening, meaning they're spending a lot, but they're not earning very much. Fiscal deficit could reach 7.6% of the GDP by 2024. The ideal level is around 5%. All of this explains why Pakistanis are not happy with Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif. I know they love cricket. So here's a cricket analogy. Pakistan need 20 runs to win from the last ball. So victory is impossible. Shehbaz Sharif is the last man batting. He's hit a 6 off the last ball and now he's celebrating. But the fans can see the scoreboard. 6 or not, they have lost the match. Pakistan's economic recovery could take years, if not decades. So a Fitch upgrade is not much to celebrate. You know what is? Free and fair elections. But then we may be expecting too much. This year is supposed to be election year in Pakistan. The polls should have been announced by now, but so far there is no news. The Pakistan People's Party, the PPP, has suggested that Parliament be dissolved on the 8th of August. Now, the PPP is part of Shehbaz Sharif's coalition, but the Prime Minister himself has not said a thing. Perhaps he is waiting for the army. Either way, this election will be a crucial moment for Pakistan, not just for their politics, but also their economy, because the next government will inherit a mess. High inflation, low reserves, and a divided society. So internet trolling is the least of Shehbaz Sharif's problems. It's day 2 of the NATO Summit in Lithuania. Let me show you a picture that sums up the takeaways so far. Look at this. It was clicked during the family photo after the roundtable. Look at President Zelensky. He's standing all alone. The NATO leaders are talking and having a good laugh. The Ukrainian leader is all alone, at war and at the mercy of the West. This should be a reality check for Ukraine. They were led on and into a war only to be left out of NATO. Today will be another day of frustration for them. Ukraine wants to be a member and it wants it now, but NATO says you're not ready. And this is how it played out. First came the roundtable. NATO leaders arrived, clicked pictures, and got down to business. Their agenda had three things: Ukraine, Russia, and China. Then there were multiple bilaterals. Turkey's Erdogan met Joe Biden and Rishi Sunak. France's Macron met leaders from Australia and New Zealand. It was like a diplomatic roulette. In the end came the joint statement, and with it, Ukraine's hopes were dashed. Let me quote what it says. We will be in a position to extend an invitation to Ukraine to join the alliance when allies agree and conditions are met. And what are these conditions? The statement doesn't say, but NATO leaders have raised multiple issues, like ending the war, reforming government agencies, cracking down on corruption. These are the conditions. NATO says do all of this and you can be a member. But this is a setback for Ukraine. A membership after 10 years doesn't help. Neither do vague commitments. Kiev wants clarity and intent from NATO, maybe a timetable on how long membership will take. Instead, this is what they got.
There is a full-fledged war, and therefore I think all allies agree that when a war is going on, that's not the time for making Ukraine a full member of the alliance.
So how is Zelensky taking it? As you would expect, he probably knew what was coming. Before landing in Lithuania, he had called NATO's position absurd and weak. But he hasn't given up. Earlier today, he arrived at the summit venue for day 2 of the talks. He was asked about his expectations, and this is what he said.
I think the invitation to NATO, and we want to be on the same page with everybody, with all the understanding. And for today, what we hear and understand that we'll have this invitation when security measures will allow. Yes.
I know it sounds like a broken record, but it also shows you how desperate Ukraine is. Their counter-offensive is not going to plan. It's too slow and too costly. Plus, Russia is striking back hard. On Tuesday, they hit 3 Ukrainian cities with airstrikes: Kiev, Odessa, and Kherson. So Zelensky has boxed himself into a corner. His entire strategy is based on Western and NATO support, their weapons, their political backing, their money. If NATO is half-hearted, Zelensky is in trouble. And Russia knows this. Their leaders are building more pressure on NATO. Look at what their former president, Dmitry Medvedev, said. I'm quoting again. The completely crazy West could not come up with anything else. In fact, it's a dead end. World War III is getting closer. This is a former Russian president and a Putin confidant. Their foreign minister, Sergei Lavrov, has also given a statement. He says the war will end when NATO stops using Ukraine to defeat Russia. Now, both these men are close to Putin. Their statements sum up the Russian mentality. A, they're not backing down. And B, if the West doesn't stop supporting Ukraine, things could get out of hand. The fighting could spill over. More countries could get dragged in. And as Medvedev said, there could be World War III. This sort of language is meant to trigger. You hear World War III, you shudder. And that's exactly what Russia is trying to do. The question is, how will NATO respond to all of this? Well, they're not giving the membership yet, but they are giving weapons. Germany, France, and the US have announced more weapons. The G7 nations are also considering a long-term security package. What does that mean? Something similar to what Israel has. They get military aid worth $3.8 billion every year, but no collective defense. The G7 could offer something similar to Ukraine, I guess anything but NATO membership. While the summit focused on today's war, it also discussed future ones. I'm talking about the showdown with China. The NATO statement mentions China 16 times. 16 times in one statement. Listen to this. The People's Republic of China's stated ambitions and coercive policies challenge our interests, security, and values. NATO is seriously looking at the Indo-Pacific. 4 countries from the region attended the summit: Australia, New Zealand, South Korea, and Japan. Naturally, China was not happy. It has opposed the invitation to these countries. It has also promised a quote-unquote resolute response if NATO moves in this direction. China's state media is doing the heavy lifting. The editorials are fuming at NATO, the usual stuff about Cold War mentality. So looking back, what do we make of this NATO summit? Until last year, this alliance was fading into obscurity. French President Macron had even called it brain dead. But now it's alive. Alive, kicking and expanding. 2 new members have joined the alliance in the last few months. It has also set its eyes on the Indo-Pacific. None of this was supposed to happen. The Ukraine war was set to be about a country's sovereignty and its right to choose, about powerful countries bullying their neighbors. But look what it has become now. The West has used the war to fuel its military complex, to add new members to NATO, to revive an irrelevant alliance. Meanwhile, Ukraine stands alone and desperate. I know this war has produced many defining photographs, but this one of Zelensky will haunt Ukrainians the most. And we have more news from India. The Finance Ministry has announced a big decision. Online gaming will now be taxed in India. How much? 28%, as decided by the GST Council. This is a federal body. It decides indirect taxes in India. And I know there will be 2 sets of reactions to this news. 1, who cares? It's just games anyway. And 2, this will kill India's gaming industry. Now, if you belong to the first group, this story is for you. Because online gaming is huge. The industry here in India is worth around $2.8 billion. By 2025, it will be worth $5 billion. The global industry is valued at $196 billion. My point is quite simple. There is big money involved. And let me explain how this works. If you go on the internet, you will find hundreds of online games. Some of them are really popular. You may have heard of games like Fortnite or Minecraft. Here in India, betting games are also quite big. Games like Dream 11 or MPL. You don't bet on who wins or who loses because that would be illegal. Instead, you create a virtual team of players before the match. If those players do well in the actual match, you win. To enter these games, you pay upfront, sort of like an entry fee at your local gaming arcade. If you win, you can get a lot of money. Take Dream 11, for instance. You can enter the game by paying just 8 rupees. But guess what the total prize pool is? 12 lakh rupees. First prize winners can get up to 4 lakh rupees. Imagine that. You pay 8 rupees, you get 4 lakhs. This should tell you why online gaming is so popular. Now let me tell you what the tax means. The GST, as we said, is an indirect tax. Technically, it is levied on the producer or seller. In this case, the gaming companies. But in practice, this tax burden, like most tax burden, is shifted to us, the consumer. So here's what's happening. Until now, the tax on gaming was negligible. If you spend $100, you pay, say, $1.8 in GST. Now you must pay $28 in tax. What does that mean? It means that your prize pool is now a lot smaller, and smaller prize pool equals less participation. So gaming companies are not happy. They say the new tax will kill the industry completely. Now here's something else that you should know. Online gaming does not have borders. There are big companies in the US and China, and they don't have to pay 28% tax. In fact, they dominate this market, the gaming market. American companies make up 23% of this market, Chinese companies 25%. So experts say Indian gamers will change loyalties. Instead of Indian games, they will switch to American and Chinese games. Then what happens to the Indian industry? Business leaders say it could perish. The finance minister has pushed back against this suggestion. She says the idea is not to kill any industry. Listen to this.
इंडस्ट्री को खत्म करना ऐसे कोई कुछ हमारे एजेंडा में नहीं है। कैसीनो को प्रमोट करने के लिए, क्योंकि वो टूरिज्म का बहुत अहम मुद्दा है एक आध स्टेट्स के लिए, उसमें टैक्स फूड प्रोडक्ट्स से भी कम होना चाहिए क्या?
The government's argument is quite simple. You can't tax online games like rice or wheat. One is essential, the other is not. So the government says 28% tax was necessary. But what about other countries? How do they tax online games? In the US, the rate depends on which state you're in. The average is about 10%. In the UK, it depends on how much you make. Their rate is between 15 and 50%. And what about China? Well, Beijing offers tax breaks to gaming companies, meaning some of them have to pay no taxes. Some state media agencies have called for taxes to be levied, but so far Beijing has refused. So governments in the West do tax online games. Sometimes the rate is as high as 50%, 50. Then why is India's decision so controversial? Well, a couple of reasons for that. One, India's gaming industry is only finding its feet. We are competing with well-established American and Chinese rivals. And two, there is already tax on winning from online games, a 30% tax. It is deducted at source. So put together, the average gamer is going to have to pay a lot. The question is, could there have been a middle ground? Certainly 1.8% tax was not viable, but is 28% too high? The government says it was a necessary move. We'll have to wait and see how it affects Indian games. Most of them are in fact betting games based on cricket, and it's not something the West or China has traditionally dealt with. So who knows? Maybe there is still hope. The Cricket World Cup will begin soon in India. Maybe that will answer some of the questions. For our next story, let me tell you about a word, obsess. I'm sure you've heard it before. It was first used in the 16th century, but back then its meaning was a little different, much like being possessed, but with a twist. To be obsessed meant that the devil has occupied your body, but you're aware of what's happening, meaning you're forced to do something, you know what you're doing, but you just can't stop. Today, the word obsessed has changed in meaning, but when it comes to weight loss, it seems like the old definition still plays out. Because we are obsessed with losing weight, we drug and jab our bodies to become thin, even if it harms us, to the point where some people become suicidal. And this is not an exaggeration. I know it feels like an ambush, but let me explain. It all started with just a bill of goods, cheap and convenient foods. They were deliberately designed to be overeaten, engineered to override our willpower, so we stuffed our faces with them. But then we were shamed for doing so by diet peddlers, celebrity magazines, and social media. They showed us size 0 figures, sculpted waists, and highly contoured faces, usually all three in one body. And they told us to shake things up with one intermittent fast here and another almond diet there. But that didn't cut it. So they pointed to weight loss supplements, drugs, and injections. The result was this. People are not only still gaining weight, they've also developed additional health problems, both physical and mental. Weight loss injections like Ozempic, Wegovy, and Saxendra are apparently making people suicidal. These injections are now under investigation. Europe's drug regulator is probing them, probing the possible link between these jabs and thoughts of suicide and self-harm. This sounds highly problematic, but it's also believable. Because all weight loss medicines have potential side effects like nausea, vomiting, diarrhea, constipation, body aches, tiredness, depression, and suicidal thoughts. So a slim body at the cost of big fat health problems. These drugs curb your appetite, shift your hormonal balance, and promise you weight loss, but there's no guarantee, and definitely no long-term benefits. Plus, they cost a bomb, anywhere between $10,000 and $20,000 a year, so obviously people are frustrated. They're losing money, but not losing weight, and they're gaining side effects. Let me show you another set of numbers. More than 60% of patients who are prescribed weight loss drugs stop within a year, but they find new takers. Why do you think that happens? People are not crazy. No one wants additional health problems. The problem is the system. It is against us. Do you think drug makers do not know about the side effects? They do. And they don't even try to hide them. But they don't tell us clearly either. Take, for example, the weight loss drugs that make you suicidal, that could make you suicidal. Their warnings say the product could give you suicidal thoughts. But suicidal behavior is not listed as a side effect. It's not the same. And this is a problem. They want you to read between the lines. While they make money off you, billions of dollars of money, within the next decade, the weight loss industry could be worth $200 billion. Today, around 1 billion people the world over are obese. Global obesity rates have tripled over the past decade. And these drugs promise change. So people fall for them. They trust the system. Not just obese patients, but even people who feel that their bodies are disappointing. Those who live in a cycle of starvation, obsession, binging, and purging. When medication promises a win, they take it. But where is the regulation? Who is looking out for the users of these medicines? Is it good enough to just publish the fine print on medicine bottles? People are making themselves sick to be thinner. Millions are trapped between hope, misery, and lies. They will buy anything that promises to fix them. Yet the mirror rarely shows people what they want to see because maybe the mirror itself is distorted. But is anyone fixing it? And now it's time for Vantage Shots, images that tell the story. The Indian Army, Navy and Air Force contingent held a practice session in France ahead of the Bastille Day parade. They marched to the tune of the song Sare Jahan Se Achha Hindustan Hamara. It translates to better than the entire world is our India. Meanwhile, UK Prime Minister Rishi Sunak and his Australian counterpart Anthony Albanese joked about a controversial moment in the Ashes cricket series. In Bulgaria, a dash cam captured the moment when a meteor fell on the earth. It lit up the night sky. And finally, we're taking you back in history. This one is especially for the boomers. On this day in 1962, rock band The Rolling Stones performed for the first time ever in London. At that time, the band only had 5 members. The 6th member was hired later that year. Over the next 5 decades, this band held over 2,000 concerts around the world. We're leaving you with this. Thanks for watching. We'll see you tomorrow.
It's going to be really provocative.
I'm sorry I didn't bring my sandpaper with me.
See, there's a crease.